This is another episode of Ponder Cruise. I am here with my newfound friend, Tavin.
Hello.
How are you, Tavin? Been having a good week?
Yeah, it's been okay.
I am going to check with him that my headphones are working because he's a tech here and I can't hear my voice.
I can hear yours.
You can hear me?
Yeah. We should both be in, I think.
Hello? 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 Okay, maybe it's working now. I think we're good.
We're good?
Yeah. Cool.
Great.
What's been new, man?
Honestly, not really much. I'm a theoretical math major, so I spend most of my day reading textbooks and doing problems out of a book.
What?
Other than that, I don't know. I'm like I get obsessed with things really easily. So
Yeah.
I breed guppy fish. So that's been like my most recent obsession is just like trying to like breed cool morphs of these little fish.
Why guppy fish?
Because they're hardy and they are easily accessible and they breed quickly. So it's easy to see genetic changes in the population of them fairly quickly.
That's wild.
Yeah, because their lifespan's about 2 years if you take care of them good, maybe 2.5 to 3.
So like, what kind of strains you got going on right now?
Nothing interesting. Just trying to. So okay, I started with like whatever I could get from the local pet store, which involves like just the kind of standard ones, like the ones with like the red and they got the spots or whatever, and then some blue longfin ones. But I'm trying to make I have a blue longfin male, and so you kind of refer like males that you breed the most are kings because they kind of dominate the genetic pool, and then the females that you use to breed are considered queens because they're like the progenitors for the genetic trait. So I'm trying to make 2 lines to then cross so I can get the best out of both crosses, because it ends up being that when you take a strain of guppy and you cross it with another strain of guppy, most of the fish that result from it are undesirable, meaning that it make an quote unquote, by the metrics that are used to gauge whether or not they're attractive fish, inferior fish. But what I'm looking for is like recessive traits that come from either parent being mixed. So I have like what I would call like a tiger stripe. So I mix like a gold, like a solid 24 karat gold colored guppy that has a black tail with just like a standard, like, I don't remember what the exact name for it is, snakeskin female. So they kind of got like an iridescent gray body with like some kind of color on their tail.
Wow.
And so that ended up netting me 2 kings, and out of those 2 kings, I selected one that is yellow and has the snakeskin spots across its whole body. And then I'm going to try to get that line to be stabilized, and doing that is kind of a gross process. Honestly, it involves a lot of inbreeding because you take either what they call line breeding, which is sister and brother fish from the same line because they share the same genetics that made the original male whose qualities you like, and you see if they're stable. If they're not, then you have to go 1 generation back and inbreed it with the mother to then reassert some of those genes back into it. You got to be careful because you can cause a lot of genetic abnormalities within your gene pool, and then your fish become not only undesirable in looks but unhealthy, which I'd argue is a little bit unethical, because like, what do you want, like a bunch of like unhealthy fish that are just going to die for? Like, it's kind of messed up. So that's line A, and then line B, I'm trying to introduce some long fin type stuff from this like really beautiful blue long fin male that I have, and then get that so that I will end up with the yellow and black snakeskin pattern, but with the blue fins that are longer. And we'll see if that's possible. I'm not super up on genetics or whatever, but it is theoretically possible that these things are compatible, but the odds of me getting it might be fairly low because like there's a lot of like genetic surveys that have been done on these fish just because like a lot of people are really obsessed with these fish like I am. So I found like a lot of interesting resources online, and they're all like, yeah, you could do it, but it might be hard. That hasn't really stopped me before, so yeah.
Are there other traits that change? Like, can you breed them to be faster, like more aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, you totally could. I think a lot of that though is kind of second order to the visuals for these things, just because they are like a hobby fish. It's not quite like livestock breeding or whatever, where you're looking for like physical characteristics. Like the most I'm looking for in terms of physical characteristics is as long as the fish can swim and don't have the most common genetic abnormalities, which would be like spinal tilt below. So like, okay, so you imagine like you have like a line, like a parallel like line, like 180 degrees. One of the most common things you'll see in a poorly bred line of guppies is like some kind of angle below parallel. in the spine, and that means it makes it harder for them to swim, and it shortens their lifespan, and it makes the birthing process if they're female harder, which can then basically guarantee that they'll die after one round of pregnancy, which is not normally standard. Like, these fish are like insane prolific breeders. Like, they will retain genetic material to be pregnant for up to a year, and they can have a litter of 20 to 60 fry off of one pregnancy, and like it could be several litters of 20 to 60 fry.
How many do you have right now?
Actually, not that many, surprisingly, because of the way I have my tank set up. It's a self-regulating system. If the population density gets too high, the other females I have in the tank, because I have several queens to maintain genetic diversity, will just eat the other one's babies. It's kind of messed up. It's just a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, it's like not the worst thing in the world. It makes me feel like a wannabe Mandel or whatever, making like a pundit square or whatever. Like
it's literally what you're doing, man.
Right.
Figured it out with fish.
So, it's like. It's not something that I'm doing for money, even though it is like, like you'll find YouTube tutorials. Look at my $5,000 a month hustle where I breed fish out of my thing. But
how do you make money off of it?
Well, they will pick the most expensive or rare fish that they can find and then set up tanks specifically to breed them, because it does require a fair bit of care and effort.
Well, with guppies, right? Or like
any fish.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, with guppies specifically, it's one of those things that it's actually very much regional. It has a geographic dependency, because a lot of people will do what I'm doing and as a hobbyist to breed,
a fish.
Yeah. And it might approach the characteristics of some other fish that is somewhat popular in another area. It just might be that the reason that like a breeding group of those guppies, because you have three females to one male is a ratio. Otherwise, the male will pester one female too much, and she will literally die of exhaustion in his attempts to breed with her. So you need to sell them in these kind of groups. But you might some people will charge $1,000 for 4 of these guppy fish, because they'll send you more than enough for the breeding group, because they're sending it from like Japan or something. And so you're paying for not only the geographic distance, but then the fact that it's specialty to your area, and they know that if they are selling it outside of their region, they can charge more than inside their region, because they have to move the fish, right? But like it's kind of like the reason, like if you buy like a specialty like fruit or something, right? Like I don't know, some weird fruit from like some faraway country relative to yours. You're gonna spend a lot of money on that fruit, even though like some guy who's living in that country would spend like the equivalent of 10 cents US to get like a whole bushel, because it's about the distance.
It's exotic.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how you can make money theoretically. I'm just doing it for fun. I just like the fish.
Dude, that's so wild. Like, that sounds like such a cool hobby.
Yeah, it's definitely a good distraction from math textbooks. For sure.
It makes sense.
Right, and they're cute too. I mean, like, a lot of people, like, obviously we as humans have a very strong desire to anthropomorphize things, but strangely enough, you don't have to anthropomorphize fish too terribly much, because these little fish are full of personality and they're very vibrant. That's why that's part of the reason I'm attracted to them, is because they're easy to breed, they're very hardy, so they're hard to kill. Like not saying that you should keep them in bad conditions, but if you're not the best fish keeper, like, you can keep them and they'll survive.
It's an easy learning curve.
Right, yeah, and then, so they're accessible, so there's something that I don't feel bad giving away to or selling for really cheap to somebody who's like, oh, I have my first fish tank. I'm like, okay, I can give you the advice and I can sell you fish that I know will survive. But then also they're very playful and fun. Like, they have like very active schooling behavior. So It's like, yeah, I mean, just the visuals of them are nice.
That's cool.
Better than TV, in my opinion.
What? How long have you been doing it?
I've had the fish tank. I mean, like, so I bought the guppies, and I was like, oh, it'd be cool. Like, I like the idea of like bioactive terrariums. You know, I got like I have a couple of like moss gardens and houseplants and that kind of thing, and like a little bioactive enclosure that I made. So I bought a fish tank like a year ago, and then I noticed that they were breeding, and then I'm like, got the idea once I saw them breeding, probably about like 6 months ago, to like take it seriously. So my whole like apartment has just been taken over with fish. Like, I got like a big stoneware bowl really cheap on sale from the hardware store, and I put like dirt and then sand in it and planted it. Now I just got like a little like fish pond on my table just for the heck of it, you know.
People, this man has been doing this for 6 months. Get obsessed. You could get obsessed with anything. Come on.
Right. No, actually, that's something like a lot of people don't let themselves get obsessed with things.
They really don't. It's true.
Yeah, like, they think that it's weird to like be really into something and to like like I know I feel like, and I probably sound like to some people like a bit of a crazy person because like 6 months in and I'm like reading weird forums that I'm having to use like internet translators to get from Swedish to English or whatever. But it's like, no, like it's totally worth it and it's fun.
It's a taste. You get a taste for obsession.
Right.
You like learn how to.
Right, and I feel like it's one of those things too that like you kind of don't lose a lot of the skills. Like once you're really obsessed with something and you've like kind of made it a part of your person, you don't really lose it. It's like riding a bike or something. You know what I mean? I know that analogy is probably overused, but you know, for instance, like I play bass guitar also, and even though I don't play it as much as I used to when I was like in high school doing jazz band and stuff like that, I can still pick it up and play a lick and have fun and play all my scales and you know like have the same level of skill. And just because I'm not as obsessed with it now as I was then doesn't mean that I'm still don't retain that ability, you know, like I can always come back to it. Because a lot of people think that if you're obsessed with something, it means you have to be like focused absolutely on it. And no, like, there are very few things in life that you really need to focus like all of your attention on all the time, you know.
When you get obsessed with these things too, they mix together. Like you take skills that you learn from this and you'll apply them to other things. Because everything, for whatever reason, everything kind of like. It seems like you can apply anything to anything. So, like, you can apply breeding fish to, I'm sure, even your math work in some ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, a good example of that would be
a stretch, but
no, actually, genuinely, there's this thing called the Fibonacci rabbit problem, which invented a whole branch of mathematics called population models, which is like kind of it's really the linear algebra. It's like a big matrix. You kind of represent population change over time. But that just came from like a toy example of like, hey, what if I in an abstract way described populations of rabbits that never die and reproduce in a very specific way. Like actually, that problem is the inception of the Fibonacci sequence. Is like how do you make a model that describes accurately at each iteration what the population of rabbits should be? And just from that toy example, you can actually get really complicated models where like you know each term of the matrix you put a coefficient in front of that represents like death or birth rate or whatever. And you can have very complex systems that are very accurate to whatever thing you're trying to model, and you know it can be inspired by something as simple as what if rabbits bred? You know?
Just gotta go deep,
right?
Just gotta keep going.
So what do you study?
I'm studying business management.
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm. Do you like it?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Do you like math?
Actually, yeah, I really do, but it's not really what I want to do. It's just a means to an end.
Do you like studying math?
Yeah. I mean,
in college. Do you like going to class and watching a lecture?
So I think lectures specifically, are kind of a crapshoot.
What's your favorite branch of math?
Favorite branch of math? That's a hard one. Probably analysis, but that's just because that's what I'm taking right now, and it's a very broad category. Like I guess if I had to be specific and pick like a branch of math that you could maybe like read one book about and feel like you know what's up. Oh man, that's a really hard one. Let me think of one that's like captivates me the most. Probably computation. Like I know, like maybe it's not like explicitly a field of mathematics, but things like recursive algorithms or kind of like complex systems, like anything where you have like something that is seemingly simple, like a simple set of rules that generate really complex results. That's always interesting to me. So a good example of that would be something like cellular automata, which is like a kind of like a toy example, but it's basically saying like, okay, given like rules that are determined on I have a 256-bit integer, right? So it's a number, and I'm representing it computationally as something that is between 0 and 256. Now, I associate with each one of those bits a rule on a simple grid. And it turns out that some of these rules are more interesting than others, and that, you know, like some of the rules have the emergent property of universal computation, meaning that from this simple rule and this simple kind of grid system where like based on what rule it is, you'll color a square or you won't color it, you can end up with a system that is quote unquote computationally complete or has universal computation, meaning you can use permutations of that system generated by that simple rule to perform any arbitrary mathematical computation. And it's all just stemming from one really simple rule on whether or not to color a square in a grid.
What's the most common thing they use it for?
Nothing. It's just for fun.
I mean, so like, what makes you really passionate about it then?
Because I want to study. Well, not because I want to study. I want to start applied computational systems company when I'm done with school at some point. I'm not really sure when that'll be. And so I just like studying the systems of computation because, like, it's good to have a very deep kind of abstract understanding for a lot of these things, because if I'm wanting to build these systems from the ground up, and I don't want to do it in just like hey, I want to take a pre-built microprocessor or a little microcomputer and just write some code on it from some proprietary language or some language that already exists, and then boom, there's my solution. Like, no, I want to from the ground up build analog purpose-built computers that are fit very specific use cases, because I feel like that's where the money is. You're not going to make money doing general computation. I mean, that's what Microsoft does. That's what Apple does, right? I mean, there are these huge companies that you probably never compete with. You can't burst into that market.
As far as coding, software coding, right?
Oh, just the whole package. Because think about what Apple and Microsoft both do. They both make software, and at least with Apple, they directly make the hardware to run the software.
Yeah.
I want to do the same thing, but instead of making it like a general PC that everybody uses, I want it to be purpose-built. Like somebody says, hey, we have this proprietary robotic arm that maybe does 3D printing on, all degrees of freedom required to move into 3 dimensions, right? So it can move and print anywhere in 3 dimensions, right? And they need software to control that, or they need a little computer to control that arm. They just have the arm, and what they're using right now isn't purpose-built. It's just some Python code or something that they're running on their laptop, and it's not efficient because they want to apply this to industry at scale. Then they'll need a computer, and I want to be the guy who could build that little computer for them.
And you'd have to build it from the ground up. You'd have to almost build the whole robot to know how to program it, right? At least understand the whole robot.
You'd have to be able to understand the whole thing for sure. And so that's part of why I'm interested in mathematics, is because it's the thing that underpins basically all of STEM. And since I'm just a huge nerd and I love math and physics and robotics and anything to do with it's not even, it's kind of weird. My motivations probably aren't standard, but it's because I'm interested in things that have a high degree of investment, because I like to get obsessed with things. So anything that takes a really long time to understand or master, I'm into, and anything that has really cool results as a product of that kind of obsessive mastery. Those are what draw me towards the field. And so just by the nature of what STEM is, it kind of drew me to that.
What's your longest project right now? Farthest out to completion. Little steps every day.
I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I don't really do many projects. I don't build. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to building things. I'd probably say the guppy breeding, because the time scale on that is it's years and years to get something that's worthwhile.
The perfect guppy.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean,
the purest guppy.
I feel the goalpost for what's perfect can change at any day. It's just for me, it's just working with what I have. It wasn't really intentional. A lot of people will go out and they'll say, hey, I see this guy's line and that guy's line, and what if I cross them, and they have something in mind already. I'm just kind of seeing what I can find expressed through a more natural process. So I let my breeding tank kind of intermingle, which isn't the best for population control, but I want to see what will come out of a seemingly chaotic system. Kind of going back to the emergent properties thing. I like to see what cool kind of crazy stuff comes out of something that I'm only influencing a very little bit.
Yeah.
This is probably my longest project. Not really related to math.
What got you really in? What opened your eyes to mathematics? What really made you passionate about it? Or was there a moment?
Yeah, probably because I knew, I had the idea when I was 13 or 14. I read, I think it was Scientific American or some science communication journal about quantum computing, and I was oh, that sounds sick. I want to do that, because I've always, I've always liked computers. I've always aspired to people at least before I was able to really think a little bit harder about who people are and what their motivations were. I was always inspired by Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, these kind of people, which I'm still inspired by what they did, but not so much who they are. You know what I mean? It's less about the personality, and it's more about I like what they did.
How do you get someone that wants to build cool stuff but doesn't get corrupted, man? Where do you think those people are right now?
I think that
in your opinion,
it's a tough one. I think that a lot of it comes down to, they say power corrupts absolutely or whatever, and I think that for a lot of people, they just don't have the personal experience to justify living a life that isn't the quote-unquote best. You know what I mean? A lot of people, they all of a sudden, they get the idea, hey, I've either always had money, so therefore I need money, or I've never had money, therefore I need money. You know what I mean? It's very rare that you'll run into somebody who, regardless of their economic background, kind of forgoes the idea of needing money and is okay with living a, quote-unquote, squalorly life. A life with, not the best things possible to their means. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, a lot of the issue is the company too, because the company, like the money keeps the company going. The money
Right.
it's the
Yeah.
blood flow of the company. And if you restrict the blood flow, if you stop the money from coming in, then the company starts to die.
100%.
Like it's the company's prerogative to keep the money coming.
Right.
And there are better ways to keep the money coming than creating the best product. So
Yeah.
almost inevitably, every time one of these companies gets big enough to where it's getting a lot of money, people start coming in and they start having these ideas that bring in more money at the expense of the quality of the product. And it happens every time. I mean, like, and it's just kind of like the way that it there's almost no way to avoid that. But that being said, there must be places that like really good technology is coming out of. I mean, like we had ChatGPT recently.
Right.
We had I'm sure there's other. I'm not huge into
Rabbit
tech,
R1. Okay, I think that's a pretty good example. Some people say it's a gimmick. It's like this little device, right? It's like supposed to be like an AI assistant, but like I pre-ordered one because I want to replace my cell phone with it because it does have SMS capabilities and phone call capabilities.
Whoa.
But it's like a little device that was co-designed by Teenage Engineering, who's one of my favorite like music equipment producers. They make like really cheap and affordable pocket synthesizers that look like calculators. It's like really cool. But it's like this little device, and the guy who made it like as far as I can tell, the company has a pretty good like standpoint when it comes to like user data collection, what they're willing to sell, like how they operate as a company. Like seems to be pretty solid like morally. And so like I think it is possible. And it's interesting you brought up ChatGPT because I was at one point fairly well convinced that they were holding to their mission statement in 2015 where they said, "Hey, we want to build AGI, artificial general intelligence, to intentionally replace everybody's jobs, but then to make it better for humanity because if nobody has to work, then we'll, like they had this whole mission plan in mind to like redevelop the systems that we live under to make it possible to like, live in a world where nobody has to work." But now it's seeming like with their deal with Microsoft that they don't really like it's about the money now because they have a board of investors and they need to keep those people's profits happy because otherwise for instance, it's what happens with all companies. It's like the idea is good, and then at some point the money starts becoming the thing that's more important than the idea. And it's not to say that the product of ChatGPT or whatever isn't getting better. It's just that like the desire to make it more profitable is there. And granted,
it's getting diluted.
Right, and I will give them the benefit of the doubt because Sam Altman did say in some blog post, I don't remember where, that the money is just the means to the end. Like it may still very well be that they are holding to their mission statement, but as far as I can tell, they've moved from being rather neutral on the whole like profit thing, where they were non-profit and then they were capped profit, which probably makes a little more sense in our economy than being non-profit, especially for what they're doing. But now they've moved to like maximum profit. So it's like, okay, now it's harder for me to like swallow the pill of your mission statement because you kind of sold your soul to like the technological, like one instantiation of the technological devil, i.e. Microsoft, because like they have, I mean, yeah, they're
hey man,
company.
maybe the tech will overcome it.
Oh, I think so.
The tech is good enough. Change the world.
Yeah, well, I'm also fairly well convinced as somebody who's very much into open source software. It's like I don't use what do they call it, iOS. I don't use Apple's operating system. I don't use Windows. I use Linux. I use free software for everything because I'm fairly well convinced that it's going to be the future.
Out there in the wilderness of tech right now.
Right. Well, you've probably heard the phrase before. In the future you'll own nothing and be happy. Like, you'd be like, thanks, Corpo. Can I have some more? Like, okay, like the Funimation, like Funimation, for instance. Like, I'm a big anime nerd. Funimation went under, and they sold to Crunchyroll. So now everybody who had access to, like, you buy like a Dragon Ball Z Blu-ray box set. They give you a digital code to watch it online on a digital library, so you can watch it wherever you are. No more access, right? Like, as part of this deal, they took away all digital rights access to Funimation products, and then they raised the price for Crunchyroll because they knew they had a market that they could artificially like direct towards this. Because even though at one point they had bought a thing that they thought that they owned, it turns out that no, they had bought a license to use a thing. They bought a digital license to watch these goods, and then once that license was revoked, hey, sorry, we thought you owned it, but you'll like Crunchyroll, right? And like, sure, like maybe their service is good, but it makes me not want to pay for it just because of like the kind of business practice of like, it just seems anti-consumer to me to be like, hey, like, you have this license, but we're not going to honor it anymore because we're fundamentally a different company now. Like, we've, like, by all legal means, like, we're a different entity, so we don't have to honor our contracts. Oh. Yeah. So, again, like, it's, like, kind of seems like you'll own nothing. Which is, like, why when we were talking earlier in the studio, like, that's why I like burning all of my sets onto CDs. is because like, hey, even if the music gets off YouTube, even if it gets taken off Spotify, I'll always have that mixtape. I'll always have that CD. They can't take that away from me. Somebody would like have to like some copyright holder would have to like track me down, break into my house, and be like, hey, I'm confiscating your CD. Like, it ain't gonna happen.
When this era of Spotify ends, I'm gonna cry. I don't.
Right.
No matter what happens, there's no way it could get better, man.
Well, it's like it makes me like okay. Like a good example too is like I love Neil Young, but he's not on Spotify anymore because
Really?
because he had a disagreement with Joe Rogan or whatever.
Oh,
like,
I thought he came back.
Oh,
Really?
did he? Maybe I don't know.
stay
if
off?
I thought he at least for I know
So
last I was aware he was still off, but it's like man, like if you bought into the Spotify platform, like you pay for their premium, you think you have access to just like music because like you're like I want to listen to music. Spotify, like you don't put like a qualitative on like whose music do I get to listen to. You're like no, it's all on Spotify, and then it turns out hey, actually it's not. Because that's the kind of digital rights management world we live in now. And like, granted, the artist should have the right to determine what platform they're on. I just think it goes to show the kind of like intangibility of digital rights ownership, where it's like kind of almost an oxymoron. It's like you don't really own the thing; you just have a license to use it. You know what I mean? For instance, it's so insidious, this kind of business model, that it even extends to physical products. Like I bet you didn't know this, but when a farmer buys Roundup Ready seeds from Monsanto, right? Monsanto being the agricultural engineering company, right? They're the people who invented Roundup in the first place, which is a whole other thing. They have to sign a contract that says that they will not grow another year's worth of food from the same seeds. They only get to have one harvest's worth of food per bag of seeds. And if you go so far as to grow another year's worth of crop from the seed, you can get sued for copyright infringement. And the case law is this, that the judge who presided over it said it doesn't matter if the mechanism for copyright infringement is literally the biological process of life, it's still copyright infringement. So you own nothing. Like, I don't know.
The mind is a powerful force.
Yeah, it's just, I'm a big advocate for, like, people actually getting to own stuff. You know, like, as much as somebody, like, I'm instanced in technology, like, I'm entrenched in it. I love computers, I love technology, but I can't stomach the idea of not owning something. That's why I pretty much exclusively use open source software, because by the very nature of the license that is used to download it, I am part owner of the software. You know, so I like that a little better. To me, it's like I'm not like super like into communism or socialism or whatever, but it definitely is kind of like a digital form of like socialism to some extent. It's like digital like rights sharing. You know, like the like the means are within the hands of the people who download the software. Like if you decide like, hey, I want to open it up, I want to see what information they're collecting, or I have an idea for how to improve this, how to improve this piece of software, you're allowed to. Versus like maybe you decide, hey, Windows is using 10% of my RAM and 10% of my CPU just to be open in the background, and I have an idea to fix that. Well, tough. You're not allowed to edit it. It's not yours. It's like fine, like that's the game they want to play, but I don't want to play the game at all.
It's cool that there's like so many different. They're almost like worlds.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, I think they're like a good way to think about it is like a digital ecosystem.
Yeah, ecosystem.
Right. I mean, that's terminology that's even used by a lot of companies. Like that's what Apple is selling you. Or that's what Microsoft is selling you when you buy their products. Is your
ecosystem.
Yeah, you're buying access to their walled garden, which is not always a bad thing. I mean, if they offer a really nice experience, if you walk into the garden and it's beautiful, and you're like, hey, there are no viruses here, there are no, like, all the apps are great, awesome, cool, pay for it, whatever. Like, I mean, like, we pay. The studio pays a bunch of money for a digital ecosystem, in the AV studio or AV dog program or whatever. Like we pay for it because the garden is good. It's closed source, but it's good. So like as long as the customer is being respected by the people that they're buying a product from, it's fine. I just think that more often than not, these companies have absolutely zero respect for the people who are buying their product.
It seems, especially lately, it seems like that. Like, I don't know. When I was a kid. Maybe I was a kid. We used to get the new tech, and it seemed pretty cool. Like the new apps that they would come out with on the App Store seemed useful, and all the services were good. But now, like every like new service I see, man, I'm like, no, I don't want this.
Right,
it's all useless.
Even something that you can kind of take for granted, like video games. Like, I thought video games would be like a live service model instead of like a piece of software you buy.
And they're like not even, bro. Like. They don't seem as good. Like they're not improving. They're not improving. Right. Like, even if they're not like worse, they're not improving.
Right. It was kind of like you said earlier. Like it becomes less about making the product better and just finding more things to sell you. Like Overwatch 2. I'm not like a huge Overwatch fan. I just think it's a good example of like a game that like was a game at one point. Like it's like literally fundamentally the same piece of software. It's not a second game. It's just like they just updated it. But they're like, okay, when you bought the game, and you had access to every character and all of the content, like actual meat and potatoes of the game, you had access to. Sure, they had the sparkle ponies or whatever, right? Like the cosmetics and the things that don't actually affect the gameplay, but that you can buy because you want to support the company. Fine, right? Like go for it. But now it's to the point where like they updated the game, they call it something different, and you have to start, even if you paid the $60 originally for the original game, now the new characters that come out, you have to either earn through gameplay or you can just buy them. So it's turned it from a piece of software that you buy to a live service model that is now pay to win because, hey, I don't want to spend 20 hours unlocking a character and they're new and they're super busted. I'm just going to pay for it.
It's like almost a casino.
Kind of, yeah.
It's like turning into that like it's not quite like the randomness, but it's that casino model where it's like you go in to play and we make a lot of money.
Right. Well, yeah, it's because it's less about the product and it's the service.
Yeah.
You know, so it's how can we make money off of you playing instead of you playing? Right. Well, yeah,
buying it to like play.
Right. Well, it's more so like how like when you can think about it almost like a theme park, right? Like when you pay for a ticket to get into the theme park and you get all the rides versus like you go to a carnival and you buy tickets to get on rides.
Yeah. So
like when you go to the theme park, you're paying to enter. When you pay for the carnival,
you get everything.
Right. So like fundamentally, like they're kind of the same thing. Like you would look from the outside and be like carnival, theme park. They got roller coasters, they got games, cotton candy, whatever. They're like these two things are somewhat the same, but the way they're monetized is different. And I think the enjoyment of these things can be severely limited by the way they're monetized. Like I don't know why like everything has to be a live service now. You know, you can't just buy software anymore.
I mean, I think maybe it's like a kind of like this is what civilization looks like as it kind of starts. This is a very deep take. This is what civilization looks like when it starts to fragment, right? So like back in the day, kings used to be able to buy whole nations. I could buy a nation and I owned everything there. I owned you. If I bought Italy, but as Britain, if Britain could go in and they buy like Italy, they buy India, and like obviously they didn't actually really own, like, you know, ownership's all arbitrary, but like they, as far as the purchasing was concerned, you buy Italy, you owned Italy, but it slowly breaks down. I mean, over time, like, oh, but you could buy a city maybe, but now you can't even buy a city, and it goes down to products. You can like buy like, oh, I can buy this product and own it. I can buy this car and I straight up own this car. I can buy this game. Yeah. And I can play it whenever I want. I can use it however I want. But just over time, it just slowly fragments down and fragments down.
Right. Well, yeah, it's funny that you brought up cars too, because I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was like Mercedes-Benz or something. It was some like fancy like car manufacturer that sells like powerful cars. And it was like a 700 horsepower engine, but unless you paid them like, I think it was like $1,000 a month or something like that, like you couldn't access the other 200 horsepower. Like they would like have a computer system artificially cap your car at only being able to use 500 horsepower.
The new Ford trucks, if they don't update their computer system, they won't run.
What?
So if it's offline, it won't run. If you don't pay, and if they charge you a subscription, it won't run.
That's crazy.
And that's just how everything is. I mean, even these big companies, bro, like, you know, back in the day, like the people used to own the company that they ran. Like you had a dude that was at the top and he owned he ran the thing. Obviously you had people like helping him out, but like he had the final say. These corporations aren't even like that.
Right.
Like you can't even point to someone. You can't even point to Elon Musk and be like, Elon Musk, why would you charge me extra for the Tesla Model X? You can't. Right. He doesn't own it.
Right.
It's all split up. It's all...
No, actually, the more I think about that, it's an interesting point because like everything's like LLC. Like, you know what I mean? It's like all holding companies are like, hey, this guy owns this holding company which has majority share in this, but his majority share is determined by some, you know, like equity firm that he has like board members for, and then they get majority say in that company. So it's like you're kind of having to like, it makes the blame a lot more amorphous and harder to track down, which may or may not be intentional. I think it just depends on the context. But it definitely lets people get away with a lot more than they probably should be able to, just in terms of like shenanigans.
It's crazy, man. Yeah. It's kind of sad. I don't know. Maybe it'll be good though. I feel like we're just going through like a kind of
It's definitely. I feel like it's a transitional phase.
Yeah, it's all
in
transitional.
society. Which I mean, like maybe you could make the argument that, like any time in history is transitional, but I feel like now more than ever is marked by a lot of change.
I think the money system right now is transitional. I think it must just be like some things transition while other things like we're not going through as much culture transition. I think we're going through more like monetary transition,
Right.
and maybe in the future, the economics will kind of solidify and go through more cultural change or something. Because it seems like that's happened.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point.
We'll see.
I don't know, I'm hopeful, and it's interesting that you asked me like, how do we make like a company that, or like, how does somebody like make a product or something and not let it get corrupted like that? Like one thing I'm interested in is that kind of process. Like I'm a somewhat conscious person, you know, like I have some fairly strong moralistic opinions and like, you know, like how I think society should operate. I'm not like gonna like browbeat and like call people out or whatever, but like in my own personal life, I live by a very strict code. You know, like I don't use plastic products if I can avoid it, especially single-use plastic. So like that's just like one example of like I think you need people who have very concrete, almost like you know, going back to like the idea of obsession, like you need to be like absolutely obsessed or like 100% convinced of your moral philosophical positions to not be corrupted by something. Because if there's any amount of slack in somebody's positionality on something, then it's very likely that enough of that slack, money, whatever the thing that it is you want, maybe it's not money, maybe it's political power or
Fame
or you know, some kind of material thing that you could be swayed.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like, not to get conspiratorial, but for instance, like that's like a fairly standard tactic used by a lot of 3-letter, 4-letter acronym organizations, FBI, CIA, and like their training manuals for like, here's how we convince people to literally commit treason. So if you can convince somebody to commit treason for money, what the hell? Or sorry, my apologies. What the heck makes you think you can't convince somebody to, I don't know, like make their product worse and charge people more money in the form of a live service for some money or some power? You know what I mean? Like if people are willing to commit treason for very like superficial things, like you could like it's a much less morally hard to justify position to be like, hey, I'm gonna make my product just a little bit worse, or hey, I'm gonna give the government a backdoor to my communications platform because they're gonna give me a extra $100,000 a year or whatever.
Start slipping down the hill, man.
Yeah. So I think like that's my goal at least is like.
Good. That's a good goal, man. I hope it works out.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope so. I don't think that I'm the kind of person. Maybe I'm saying this from a position of like being a broke boy. You know, like I don't got money. I have a hard time imagining I'll ever really have money, and it's not like I'm not depressed about it or whatever. But
Dude,
it just
you're
makes,
obsessed. You'll make money.
Right. Well, it just
That's what
makes
it
makes me reevaluate what is the important things, because like I'm like I don't have money in the first place. So first, it's like I don't make money, but like basically every opportunity somebody comes up to me and says like, and I'm not trying to like toot a moralistic horn here. I just mean this as like to demonstrate how I think about my economic standing. Is like I was at the coffee shop the other day. Some lady came in for Habitat for Humanity. I know somebody who got a Habitat for Humanity house. So I'm like, here's $20. Even though I'm broke and I'm like the $20 was like probably could have spent it on food, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's fine. Like I would rather give it out because it's not really an object to me. You know what I mean? Because it's like I'll like it's almost like the same thought process. Like when somebody's so rich, money's not a thing. When you're so poor, money's not a thing.
Yeah.
So I just think like more people need to think about money as not really being like the end all be all, like the superordinate goal, but think about like making people's lives better. Like they need to supplant, like they need to like place in their mind or at the forefront of their company some not just abstract goal, but actually actionable, measurable goal that you can say, hey, last year I made a 10% increase or 10% movement towards this goal. Whether it be like, hey, like we want to reduce our single-use plastic use. You could effectively measure that. You could say as a company, one of our goals is internally to not use any single-use plastic. That's something you could actually action and measure, and it's something that would probably benefit, if not the small community of people who work for you, maybe the world as a whole, even if only a little bit. And I think it's like, if everybody started looking at these little goals that only make a little bit of a difference, but like if everybody did it, it would make a lot of a difference. You know?
Dude, a little bit goes a long way.
Right. It's the same thing that like a lot of people have, like just this kind of nihilistic sense of like how they engage and should engage with our societies. They think like, For instance, voting. Why bother voting? Both the candidates suck. I don't like either of them. Well, that's not saying that's my opinion, but like a lot of people have this opinion, right? So they think, why vote at all? But it's like, well, it actually turns out that the majority of Americans are independent and don't really want to vote along one way or the other. So if only 30% of them got together, that's more voting power than any one party. So if you're like disenfranchised with something and you think that you don't have any say, well, it turns out that you're probably not alone and that the majority of people think that way too.
Let's get Kanye West in.
Maybe, I don't know. I think he's just got. I think I'm skeptical of anybody with cult of personality, and I think that inherently that makes me skeptical of parties because they're always cult of personality.
I agree.
He would definitely be, as much as I love his music, I think he would totally be cult of personality.
I agree. I believe in Kanye West, though. I think he's the exception. I think we should vote him in. Man, we're running out of time, so I gotta ask my question. What is college to you?
Okay, not to use internet terminology, but I don't know how much of like an internet dweller I am. I'm kind of black-pilled on college. I think that, and I don't mean anything by this, and I don't think that people should be offended when I say this, but I think that probably something like 85 to 90% of people are wasting their time at college and really shouldn't be here. For instance, I used to work at a coffee shop. The stereotype is true. Most of the people who work there graduated with a 4-year degree in political science, journalism, or creative writing, or something like that. It's like, I asked them, I'm like, hey, did you get that degree because you really liked that subject? And they said no, it was because I knew I could do it. So either it was easy or they had an aptitude for it and they thought they would get a job from it. But it turns out that while it was easy and they did have an aptitude for it, they didn't get a job from it. And it really bothers me that most of the world is set up, at least in the West, that you need a degree to get a job that otherwise 40 years ago you would have hardly even needed a 4-year diploma for. So for me, college is specifically a field or a place I can go to discuss very technical, very technical, low-level details of very specific subjects that require a lot of time and effort to understand fully. And
that couldn't exist anywhere else.
Right? Like, you wouldn't have the ability to, I couldn't learn theoretical mathematics to a satisfactory degree without having people who know more about it than me to talk to and to teach me this thing. However, I'm pretty sure I could learn just as much about creative writing as somebody who has a master's degree or a doctorate in it, just by creative writing, because you can creative write at home. You could do journalism at home. I mean, look at like Channel 5 or anybody's Substack, Channel 5, Andrew Callahan, All Gas No Breaks, that guy or whatever, right? Like, super awesome independent journalism. I don't think the guy has a degree, and even if he did, it's kind of irrelevant because literally anybody can start a YouTube page and a Patreon and have like ethics.
Because the people that excel at their careers are the people that spend time in their careers. It's
right.
The people that go to work and spend their time at work that do really well at their jobs. But with that being said, I think that your take on it is really important. I mean, like, we really need a space for like these little minute detailed like areas of study. The problem is we don't see college that way. No, it's not presented that way.
It's a means to an end. For a lot of people, it's equivalent to getting a trade skill. In my opinion, with infinitely less use. Because at least as a mechanic, you can guaranteed get a job, and you could even be your own business owner. But you probably won't start your own business with a creative writing degree or a fine arts major. Like, it probably won't happen. Like, I'm sure if you love it, study it. However, don't be deluged to think that you're going to get a job from it. So I guess in one word for me, like, college is passion. Like, it's like you have to have a passion for something. And if you're just doing it because somebody told you to go through the motions, I would encourage you to seriously reevaluate what it is you want to do with your life. And if your only goal is get a job that makes 6 figures, you can do it without getting in $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 in debt, depending on your economic standing. So, yeah, I don't know. That's my take on it.
Stay passionate.
Get obsessed.
Tavin, thank you for being on. Do you have any last pieces of advice for everyone listening?
Yeah.
Blow our minds.
I mean, it's not really like a super like hot take or whatever, but just like learn a actually useful skill, even if you're like doing a degree that you're like passionate about. Like, learn how to write code, or like learn how to like do some financial analysis. Like, learn something secondary. For instance, I'm getting another degree in data analytics just because I know I need something to make myself marketable, because as well off as a theoretical master's degree is going to make me in terms of other STEM jobs, it isn't guaranteed to get me a job, but the data analytics degree will give me a set of skills to do so. So if you can find something that you know, like, you'll have a hard time monetizing your fashion design degree, go do a little bit of coding, or like learn how to use Microsoft Word or Excel. So at the very least, you can work a job that's not going to break your back, because you'll have that set of skills that don't require physical labor, and you can then pursue your passion in your free time. Because a lot of people will just end up getting sucked into this black hole of like working a terrible job and having no energy, even with a 4-year degree. You know, because it turns out, hey, I actually hate creative writing or whatever.
Thank you, Tavin.
Of course.
Have a great night, everyone.